अस्सलाम वालेकुम। आई एम योर होस्ट नेम बिन मोहम्मद रफ़ी। ये है मेरी दिस इज़ माई यूट्यूब चैनल ज़मीर यूनिवर्सल। आई एम गोइंग टू टॉक टू यू अबाउट an incident now, another moment in the history of this world, another humiliation which is in the waiting for United States of America, another exit with shame from another part of the world. And the people, and there is a say on the civilized world, in all the, I think, teaching institutions or all the big institutions of the world, that if you make a mistake once, fine. You are told you made a mistake and you are careful and you don't usually make the same mistake twice. But if you keep making the mistake and you make more than two mistakes and it's same and similar, and you're not ashamed to be humiliated and humiliate your whole 250 million fellow citizens, and you visit their graves, you build monuments for them, and you have the long list of names written on the people who lost their lives. What is it you get? It's not your son, it's not your blood, it's the blood of those innocent soldiers, whether they are Americans or in America. There are no natives who are in the American army, maybe 0.001%, maybe 1 or 2. There mostly are immigrants. And the people who give their life are from every country: African Americans, Asian Americans, Japanese, Pakistanis, Indians, Spanish, Mexicans, Canadians, British, Irish, from the whole world, even Eastern Europe, Russians, Polish, Swedes, Norwegians, from Belgium. So every corner of the world who migrated and had their children gone into the American army. They were insulted, they were killed in the Vietnam War. And I'm going to show some glimpses of the disgraceful exit just to remind the American citizen and Joe Biden. That was the wrong thing at that time, to support and try to change a regime which America had nothing to do with it, but should have learned with that humiliation and that defeat, and to see how they are now trying to get onto the helicopter, and just because the ambassador is non in it, they are waiting, and you can see the blood pressure and the pulse rate of those people and the adrenaline rush. Now, they didn't learn anything from that. For 20 long years, they had their soldiers killed and trillions of dollars spent, and they had gathered 65 countries, all the NATO countries, and everybody they can think of, their friends, their allies, Australians, New Zealanders, you name it, and they had it there. And with the humiliation, they had to leave Afghanistan, and you can see for that how they are desperately trying to ride on that plane, which has space just very little. And even you can listen to the pilot that I have only capacity for 800, and you can see how it is stopped. Unfortunately, Joe Biden, this Sleepy Joe, is this Zionist, this criminal, this war criminal, this Zionist who is a self-proclaimed Zionist, a Christian Zionist. They hardly, in the 250 millions, maybe there are a million Zionists, and they are those Christians who think that these people will solve us, they bring their Messiah. Nonsense. There is no such thing. And they are not even Christians who think that way. So the Zionists, you think, is the criminal race, and separated just like you have the cream and the butter over the milk when you keep rinsing it. And that's the scum of the society, the filth and the dirt of the society is the Zionists. And look, who asked you to go and take your people back again into that bloody country who is been by the International Court of Justice been declared that he is doing genocide in Gaza? You know it fully well, and if you don't have any intelligence agency, that there is no such thing as Gaza Strip. And the whole thing was created by this rascal, this mentally deranged person, Netanyahu, and you are following that person. If you are following that person and publicly you show that you have disagreement, that shows you are a hypocrite, you are a liar, and you are a cheat, and that's, I think, what I can say, the least about you is about time stop and do not fight with Iran. It's not just Iran you are going to cope with this. This time you are going to cope with the whole Muslim world. You are going to be attacked from 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 or maybe 10 different places, and it's not just missiles. If you were really serious to stop the war, and also I'm talking about the sector unity, you should have immediately declared the no-fly zone over Gaza, so that the main destruction done to the Gaza with flattening their whole habitat and cornering them in Rafah is their aircrafts, and you supplied them F-15, F-35, F-16, and the bombs you have hit. So you are the criminal. You have the blood of all those children and women and all those hospital patients and all those babies whose oxygen was plugged out and the newborns died in their incubators. You are the criminal. You criminal, you stop it, stop it, stop it. And I think the Americans should raise their voice with me loud enough to say so that this mentally deranged person, this president, look at even Trump, who has a lot about his character and about his, you should see that this man doesn't know what he is doing. So stop him. Don't go and fight. You are going to lose it, and then the humiliation with which you are going to exit with your this illegitimate child in your lap, Netanyahu, or the state you have created, this illegitimate, the Harry Truman just created. He says that he was looking for a place where he could have Israel, and this is the place he chose because the water will flow from the other side into it, and not in Africa. So when you gave birth to this illegitimate child, and now for God's sake bury him, and don't get buried with you, and you have no right to bury 250 million Americans with you in it.
And then you've got the Israeli army, which I like to refer to as one of the best trained, best equipped, best fed terrorist organizations in the world. And yes, they have generals and they have nice uniforms, but their entire purpose is terrorism. And just as one example, I'll give you one example. Almost exactly 4 years ago, as Israel began its attack on Gaza, September the 27th, 2008, at 11:25 in the morning, what I refer to as the most shameful day in the Jewish history, the most shameful day in the history of the Jewish people. Israel began carpet bombing Gaza, and on the first day of what was to be a 21-day attack, they dropped 100 tons of bombs. Okay, a 1-ton bomb will decimate an entire city block. Gaza is one of the most densely populated places in the world. 800,000 children live in Gaza. 11:25 is exactly the time when the morning school shift and the afternoon school shift change. So all the kids are in the streets. All the children are on the streets. That was the moment decided by the decision makers in Israel to begin the attack.
2,000-pound bombs. Every one of those bombs is an act of terrorism. And the stunning lack of empathy towards Palestinian lives is disgusting.
Cenk is going up against two Zionists, Piers Morgan and Douglas Murray.
And you clearly know nothing about this particular conflict, and you've obviously seen none of it.
This is what he's up against. A Zionist bozo with the laziest colonizer accent who, as always, will start with a personal attack because he's on the wrong side of history and can't argue with facts.
So that is why we have to all worry about what Hamas might do
I don't think it's simple as that.
Hold on, let me finish the point. Let me finish the point.
Zionist interruption attempt by Piers, but he got shut down. Prepare for the cooking.
They might do if they had infinite power, the kind of power that Israel. Meanwhile, Israel is actually doing the genocide, preventing a Palestinian state and saying you are not allowed to exist, and if you dare try to exist, we'll kill.
Okay.
This is a complex situation. It's 75 years ago. There is a statute of limitations on things like this, a moral statute of limitations. Move on. Establish yourselves in the countries that you left and went to. Get rid of these refugee camps. Get rid of UNRWA and become full citizens of the countries you moved to, the way my grandparents became full citizens of the United States
let me go
after pogroms had made them leave Poland.
Okay, come to Norman Finkelstein. Your response to that?
Okay, thank you, Piers. First of all, as a general point, I agree with the notion of a statute of limitations on your claims to a parcel of land. The first time I came across that expression was reading Arnold Toynbee's great history of the world, actually. And he makes the point in his history that isn't there a statute of limitation on the claims of Jews to Palestine? He said that claim was made 2,000 years ago. And it's claimed that, even today it's claimed that, based on what happened 2,000 years ago, there's a large portion of Israeli population who believes they have title to the West Bank, they have title to Gaza, because of that claim 2,000 years ago. Isn't there a statute of limitations? Allow me to complete my thought, and then you can disagree. Isn't there a statute of limitations on the claim from 2,000 to 3,000 years ago?
Dear members of the media, over the last 6 months, the Israeli military campaign has brought relentless death and destruction to Palestinians in Gaza, with more than 32,000 people reportedly killed and more than 75,000 injured, the vast majority women and children. Lives are shattered. Respect for international humanitarian law is in tatters. During my visit to the Rafah crossing 10 days ago, I met veteran humanitarians who told me categorically that the crisis and suffering in Gaza is unlike any they have ever seen. Meanwhile, as I saw on my way to the Rafah crossing, long lines of trucks loaded with humanitarian aid continue to face obstacle after obstacle. When the gates to aid are closed, the doors to starvation are opened. More than half the population, over 1 million people, are facing catastrophic hunger. Children in Gaza today are dying for lack of food and water. This is incomprehensible and entirely avoidable. Nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. I'm also deeply troubled by reports that the Israeli military's bombing campaign includes artificial intelligence as a tool in the identification of targets, particularly in densely populated residential areas, resulting in a high level of civilian casualties. No part of life and death decisions which impact entire families should be delegated to the cold calculation of algorithms. I've warned for many years of the dangers of weaponization artificial intelligence and reducing the essential role of human agency. AI should be used as a force for good to benefit the world, not to contribute to waging war on an industrial level, blurring accountability. In its speed, scale, and inhumane ferocity, the war in Gaza is the deadliest of conflicts for civilians, for aid workers, for journalists, for health workers, and for our own colleagues. Some 196 humanitarian aid workers, including more than 175 members of our own UN staff, have been killed. The vast majority were serving UNRWA, the backbone of all relief efforts in Gaza. Others include colleagues from the World Health Organization and the World Food Programme, as well as humanitarians from Doctors Without Borders, the Red Crescent, and just a few days ago, World Central Kitchen. An information war has added to the trauma, obscuring facts and shifting blame. Denying international journalists entry into Gaza is allowing disinformation and false narratives to flourish. We honor all humanitarian workers who have been killed in this conflict and pledge to remember their commitment and sacrifice. Following this week's appalling killing of 7 humanitarian workers from World Central Kitchen, The Israeli government has acknowledged mistakes and announced some disciplinary measures. But the essential problem is not who made the mistakes. It is the military strategy and procedures in place that allow for those mistakes to multiply time and time again. Fixing those failures requires independent investigations and meaningful and measurable changes on the ground. In the aftermath of this tragedy, the United Nations was also informed by the Israeli government of its intention to allow a substantial increase in humanitarian aid distributed in Gaza. I sincerely hope that these announced intentions are effectively and quickly materialized, because the situation in Gaza is absolutely desperate. Dramatic humanitarian conditions require a quantum leap in the delivery of life-saving aid, a true paradigm shift. I repeat my urgent appeals for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, the unconditional release of all hostages, the protection of civilians, and the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid. Last week, the Security Council called for just that. And in December, the Council demanded accelerating the delivery of life-saving aid under a UN mechanism. All these demands must be implemented. Failure would be unforgivable. 6 months on, we are at the brink of mass starvation, of regional conflagration, of a total loss of faith in global standards and norms. It is time to step back from the brink, to silence the guns, to ease the horrible suffering, and to stop a potential famine before it is too late. Thank you.
Thank you. Edie Letter.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. You've said there should be an independent investigation. What can the...
There was no Gaza Strip. The Strip itself is an Israeli invention. Gaza was a cosmopolitical town on the Via Maris, the road from Alexandria up to Alexandretta in Turkey. And because it was the main road on the sea, many people from different countries and cultures passed through Gaza and left an impact that turned it into one of the most cosmopolitical towns before 1948. It also had a very good system of coexistence between Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Just recently, a friend of ours found an interesting declaration in 1905 by the 3 heads of the religions in the city of Gaza, expressing their delight in 1905 and how well are the 3 communities deal with issues of friction, disagreement, and conflict. Israel created the Gaza Strip because, unlike other places into which it could push the many Palestinians it expelled during the Nakba, during the 1948 catastrophe, unlike other countries such as Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, that were willing to receive the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that Israel expelled, Egypt closed its border. Egypt refused to accept even one Palestinian. And because of that, the leader of Israel, the great architect of the ethnic cleansing of 1948, David Ben-Gurion, who ashamedly has a boulevard named after him in Paris, is a war criminal. And he decided that Israel is willing to give 2% of historical Palestine in order to turn it into the biggest refugee camp in the world. And that's how the Gaza Strip was created, by the Israelis as a kind of rectangle, a structure, a geometric kind of structure, into which Israel pushed the Palestinians from the central of Palestine and from the south that Egypt was unwilling to accept. The last group of Palestinians who were pushed into the Gaza Strip, were those living in 11 villages on whose ruins, on the ruins of these villages, Israel built the settlements that were attacked on the 7th of October by the Hamas. So the Hamas attacked settlements built on the ruins of the last villages of Palestine that were destroyed by the Israeli army and expelled to Gaza. In the Israeli archive, we have a very known document called Order Number 40. Order Number 40 is from the 25th of November 1948, and it was sent by the Israeli Central Command to the commander in the area of Gaza. And it has the name of the 11 villages, and the order says, and I quote literally what the order says, occupy the village, expel all the people to Gaza, burn the houses, and demolish the stone houses. Because some of the houses of the Palestinian villages in 1948 were built of mortar and straw, and therefore it was possible to burn them. But the stone houses had to be blown up by the Israeli army. So one historical context we have here is a generation of grandfathers and grandmothers, fathers and mothers, grandchildren that live either directly or indirectly the Nakba of 1948 in a very vivid way on a daily basis, not only because they are thinking about Jaffa or they are thinking about Beersheba or any other place from which they were expelled, but also by watching the Israeli settlements on the other side of the fence from which most of their parents and grandparents came from. And Rania mentioned the March of Return in 2018. This was exactly one of the objectives of the March of Return, to remind the world that the settlement on the other side of the fence, the ones who would be attacked on the 7th of October, were Palestinian villages destroyed through the ethnic cleansing of 1948.
When you look at the conflict right now in Gaza, we've seen that the Israeli Minister of Justice trying to force Netanyahu to escalate the situation, to attack Rafah. How do you see the Biden's policy in Gaza? How do you see the Netanyahu's policy in this conflict?
Well, I think what you're watching is best understood by not doing what we call here in the United States getting lost in the weeds. And you don't see the big picture, you get lost in the little details. So I'm going to try to answer your question by talking about the big picture. Israel is one of the last, if not the last, effort at what we call settler colonialism. Settler colonialism. That's when a group of people, sometime in the last 4 centuries, the history of capitalism, a group of people settle in a colonial territory. So the British government or the Dutch government or somebody else takes over some land, usually with military force, and then to make it a paying proposition. And remember, the goal in colonial situations was to make the colony pay for its own colonization. So, for example, the first book I ever wrote was about British colonialism in East Africa. And they made the people of East Africa grow coffee, the single most important product, Arabica coffee, grown in the highlands in the middle of Kenya. Okay, they needed labor, so they made the Africans live in reserved areas where they could not sustain themselves. There wasn't enough land, there wasn't enough place for animals. So the only way to survive would go to be and work on the coffee farm of the colonial British who came in, got the land for next to nothing, and were now provided with the labor and could sell their coffee back into London. Okay, so that was a settler colonialism. Australia is another one. New Zealand is another one. South Africa is another one. Canada and the United States are also. What you notice, though, in the list I just gave you, is that the settlers found themselves sooner or later in a oppositional position with the local population. And so what began to happen was the systematic destruction of those local people. So, for example, again, using my example of Kenya, it eventually produced in the early 1950s something called the Mau Mau Rebellion of Black Africans rising up against the British. And it forced the British out. A few years after that, even though they slaughtered huge numbers of African people, by that time it was over. They knew, and the British had to leave. Here in the United States, same thing. Ethnic cleansing is what the settlers eventually did. They destroyed, literally by mass killing, the native or indigenous people. The few that remain are still to this day stuck, many of them, on reservations where they can barely make a living. Indigenous Americans are among the poorest, the least healthy, the most riddled with crime and alcohol and all the rest. It became, after they were done, it became a new world in which ethnic cleansing and the slaughter of indigenous people was no longer celebrated. In the 17th, 18th, 19th century, the British thought they were bringing God and civilization and progress and modernity to India or to Pakistan or to fill in the blank. But nowadays, everybody not everybody, but almost everybody understands that that's not what was going on, that there was money being made. It was a standard joke in England that if you could not be successful in your career in England, you could always go to the colonies, and there you would become a gentleman farmer, because all the work was done by the masses in India and so forth, okay? The problem for Israel is that it's trying to do the same thing, but it's doing it too late. The world is not what it was. The balance of forces is not what it was. You can't do in the 21st century what was common in the 18th and 19th centuries. Nobody should be surprised at that. But there's deep in the Israeli population a sense of the hypocrisy of the British or the Americans or the Australians wanting them to make a deal. Well, they didn't make a deal. There's no two-state solution for the Maori people in New Zealand or the Aboriginal people in Australia or the indigenous people in the United States and Canada. Not at all. No two-state solution. They couldn't even vote in elections here until a few years ago. So they don't have most civil rights, and on and on and on. So that's the first problem. Israel is caught in a historic impossibility. The world will not tolerate what the Israelis are doing. The very people who did it themselves 200 years ago are now not willing to watch it unfold here. Yes, for the first few months, they all looked away and pretended they didn't have to, but now, and you know why? Because the rest of the world, the Arab world, the Muslim world, and the whole world watching this slaughter is horrified. You can't be telling anybody that they're bringing God or modernity or anything else. You are slaughtering the people in order to take the land. That's what it's about. And the rest of the world protests. And that makes it very hard for the Western world, Australia, New Zealand, and the rest of them to pretend that they can be neutral. They can't. They can't. So that's the first problem. Israel's project is a historical impossibility. You cannot do it now. And wherever they draw the red line, whether it's going into the camp at Rafah, or whether it is, by the way, attacking a consulate in Damascus of the Iranian government without any provocation that anybody has been able to point to, just as an act of war in a non-war situation when you're already at war somewhere else. This is crazy stuff. And the world looks at it that way. And if they take the troops out of Gaza and put them against Hezbollah in the north and against Lebanon and so on, it'll be the same. You can't do this now. And the Israelis are discovering they can't. Mr. Biden has been pro-Israel all of his life. He collects huge amounts of money from pro-Israeli donors here in the United States. He has all his alliances built around that. And you could see what he did. He was 100% for Israel. Yeah, now he's 42% for Israel. Why? Has he changed his mind? Of course not. But he sees all around the world the signs of a changed situation. He miscalculates because he doesn't understand the big picture. You and I have discussed this. He miscalculated, and the people around him and the European leaders, they didn't understand what they were doing going to war against Russia. The war against Russia, they are losing that war. And there's no sign of changing. They have escalated over and over again. They would never send in tanks. They did. They would never send in surface-to-air missiles. They did. They would never send in F-15 fighter planes. They did. Now they will never send troops on the ground. They probably will. None of it works. None of it works. Here's another sign. The whole world is supporting mostly Hamas, not Israel. Therefore, they miscalculated. They thought they could destroy Hamas. They can't. Every time they kill somebody, and they call everybody they kill Hamas, every time they kill somebody, 3 more people become Hamas because they saw their mother being killed or they saw their child being destroyed. You are creating more Hamas with every day. This is crazy. This is a policy that is self-destructive, but you can't see it in the minds of many in Israel. They can't see it any more than the Americans could see that the Russians could and would mount a serious war effort, and not just serious militarily, but serious politically, serious diplomatically, serious, ideologically. They miscalculated. Those are the 2 major wars right now, Gaza and Ukraine, and the West miscalculated both of them. And no, those are not isolated incidents. They miscalculated in Iraq. They miscalculated in Afghanistan. The Taliban run Afghanistan. It's very clear. And the biggest winner in the Iraq-Iran situation is Iran, who's supposedly an enemy. I mean, And you're not seeing any adjustment. They can't see what is happening. So the biggest problem is a change in the world that these people have set themselves against. And if a relatively small group of people, Israeli Jews, are a small number, whatever it is, 6 million, 8 million, whatever the number is, but they're not strong enough to take on the whole world. And it's an illusion and a delusion for them to imagine that they can do that. They can't do it militarily. They can't do it economically. They can't do it politically. They can't even subdue the people of Gaza. And Mr. Biden miscalculated even in his own country. He thought that this country would be unanimously pro-Israeli. Not true. To the surprise of many, and I admit I'm one of them. I'm surprised at the amount of American sympathy for Gaza, for the Palestinians, including many American Jews, many. And Mr. Biden is therefore confronted with having insisted we're with you 100%, and now he has to retreat. It's going to hurt him in the election. It's going to hurt him a lot. He may still win, but he is worried. That's the only reason he is telling Mr. Netanyahu, you better adjust. And Mr. Netanyahu is talking, I'm sure, to Mr. Trump.
Erdogan, who was so tough when he was talking about Israel, but he didn't do anything. And his party has lost. It seems that he's changing his policy toward Israel. Turkey is imposing export restrictions to Israel. Just today, they announced that on 54 products, including jet fuel, engine oil, chemicals, and many other things. On the other hand, we see that 68% of Israelis are supporting this policy in Gaza. It seems to me that they're not understanding. At the end of the day, they have to get along with these countries.
Well, let's remember, their power has always been dependent on and sustained by the power of the United States. But they don't understand any more than the leaders in the United States that the power position of the United States is not today what it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And that therefore the support for Israel that they used to assume is now, this is a terrible shock to them. They don't know what to do. They cannot go against the United States. The United States provides 2/3 of their military equipment. You know, Germany provides about 25% and Italy the rest. That's it. That's who's, and all of these countries, all of them, even Germany, have large movements now that are not in favor. When the Houthis began to throw missiles on the ships in the Red Sea, what I said to people was this: every Arab community that is sympathetic to Palestine, which is almost every one of them, every Muslim community around the world that watches the West smashing a Muslim population in a very unfair battle there, they are all looking for ways to push back at Israel. And even if they don't want to and are afraid of the Israelis, and many of them are, they have their own internal population. Mr. Erdogan lost an election for the control of Istanbul, and he lost in many of the other larger cities. Now, this is an old struggle in Turkey, but it is hurting him. And the people he needs to mobilize want him to do something about the Palestinian. So now he's worried. For his own reasons, he now has to do what the Houthis did in terms of Yemen. But that...
By 1974, North Vietnamese troops had violated the Paris Peace Accords and renewed their assault on the South. It was clear the Republic of Vietnam would fall. In April of '75, North Vietnamese troops approached the southern capital of Saigon. President Gerald Ford ordered all U.S. troops and citizens out of the country.
Permit the movement of refugees to the area of their choice.
And on April 29th, Armed Forces Radio began playing White Christmas to signal an evacuation was underway.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas.
Captain Gerald Berry was assigned to rescue U.S. Ambassador Graham Martin. The mission evolved into an 18-hour day of shuttling people to an armada of ships waiting in the South China Sea. And as Berry flew toward the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, he could see enemy tanks approaching the city.
So I land behind the embassy, said, I'm here to get the ambassador. Because I'm thinking somebody told him I was coming to get him. Well, then somebody else gets on the phone and said, well, the ambassador isn't coming. I said, well, really? I said, I'm supposed to get him. Well, no, he's not. So take a lift of these. So they loaded Vietnamese on him.
In the early hours of April 30th, despite multiple flights with hundreds of evacuees and with time running out, Berry uttered 3 words that meant it was imperative for the U.S. diplomat to leave.
I'm not leaving the roof until the ambassador's on board. And out of nowhere, I said, the president sends. 2 minutes later, the ambassador's up with his whole staff to come out. That's all we needed. Probably needed, I could have said that at 12 in the afternoon. So he comes up, gets on, we fly out with the ambassador, and you make the call, you know, tiger, 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 that means the ambassador's out.
Personally, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that the United States of America is being humiliated and is leaving an area that we had come to defend, and we've been defeated. Yes, we've chosen to leave, but we've chosen to leave because it's no longer defendable with the resources that we have chosen to commit, and the limits that we have put on our involvement in South Vietnam.
Shocking scenes of desperation and chaos in Afghanistan are being seen around the world. Can't believe my eyes, says the man who shot this video of people clinging to an American cargo jet as it takes off. Machine gun fire could be heard as thousands of panic-stricken Afghans stormed the airport. They battled their way onto civilian planes which took off with hundreds of passengers jammed inside. One air traffic controller marveled as a pilot ferried 800 people to Dubai in a plane designed for 150.
800 people on your jet? Holy cow.
There were more scenes of panic as night fell, and thousands more fought to get on any plane going anywhere. Caught in the maelstrom are reporters for American TV networks, including courageous women like CBS News correspondent Roxana Saberi.
For security reasons, our hotel is under lockdown at the moment. That's why I'm speaking to you from my room. The situation outside is very volatile.
I spoke to PBS correspondent Jane Ferguson.
I've covered many wars and revolutions and crises around the world, and I've never seen anything like what I'm seeing here or what I'm having to deal with here as a professional.
ABC's Ian Pannell described the eerie scene in Kabul.
Well, we've just been out onto the streets. The most striking thing out there is we didn't see one single woman. Half the population is now hiding behind closed doors.
There's deep fear. You know, the Taliban have had an assassination campaign against professional women, women in particular, who have a very strong presence.
Signage at this beauty salon in downtown Kabul is being whitewashed over. This 12-year-old girl was in tears as she told the world, "No one cares about us." And here they are, the new rulers of Afghanistan, taking over the presidential palace, a humiliating end to 20 years of American leadership in a faraway land.
when those who are occupied refuse to submit, when they continue to resist, we drop all pretense of our civilizing mission and unleash, as in Gaza, an orgy of slaughter and destruction. We become drunk on violence. We kill with reckless ferocity. We become the beasts we accuse the oppressed of being. We expose the lie of our vaunted moral superiority. We expose the fundamental truth about Western civilization. We are the most ruthless and efficient killers on the planet. This alone is why we dominate the wretched of the earth. It has nothing to do with democracy or freedom or liberty. These are rights we never intend to grant to the oppressed. Honor, justice, compassion, and freedom are ideas that have no converts, Joseph Conrad reminds us. There are only people without knowing, understanding, or feelings who intoxicate themselves with words, repeat words, shout them out, imagining they believe them, without believing in anything else but profit, personal advantage, and their own satisfaction.
यूनिवर्सल टेलीविजन को सब्सक्राइब करना ना भूलें, उसके बाद बेल बटन पे क्लिक करें और अपने कमेंट्स के सेक्शन में अपने कीमती जो ख्यालात का इजहार ज़रूर